Okay. So hi, and welcome to the Flex session on CBE, Competency-Based Education, which is kind of a new thing that they're starting to set up in the community college system. My name's Duane. For those of you that don't know me, looks like most of you probably do know me. I teach business, and I'm also the curriculum chair. There's probably too many of us to actually have everyone introduce themselves, but what we'll do is we'll have our presentation panel introduce themselves, and then we'll go into our presentation. So let's just going across the top of my screen here. Marty, would you mind starting?
Sure. I'm Marty Parlman, and I teach nutrition, and it appears that my phone and voice might not be synced, face might not be synced so well, but my internet's not that stable. All right, Mara?
Okay.
Thanks. I'm Mara Sanft. I'm the Articulation Officer for the college here at Miramar.
Desi, please.
Hi, I'm an adjunct professor now. I retired from being an administrator, classified administrator, 5 years ago. So I've been teaching 5 years as an adjunct here on Miramar. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And is Isabella with us today? I'm not sure if she could make it. She was also part of our group, but wasn't going to be able to present today. And is there anyone I'm forgetting in our group? Okay. So welcome. So we're going to present today on competency-based education. You probably saw my email summarizing it. I'm going to screen share a presentation. As we go along, you're probably going to have some questions, concerns, or comments that come up. If you would, please just put those in the chat room. Partway through the presentation, we're going to pause and we're going to have an interactive session where Desi will be managing the comments in the chat room. And then we'll go to them individually and talk them out as we go along. This is a brand new thing, so I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions in everyone's mind. There certainly is in the minds of those of us that put the presentation together. And so we want to try to do two things. We want to capture those questions and concerns, and we also want to talk them out as best we can to see how that might work. Okay. Let me see if I can screen share. All right, you should be looking at the slide presentation now. So this is competency-based education. This is what we're gonna cover today, and who's covering the different parts. And with that, I will turn it over to Marty. Marty, please go ahead.
All right, so as you can see, we're going to hear an overview of competency-based education based on what we were able to learn about it, on what's available now and what we understand. And Duane already went over some housekeeping, which is the next slide. Use the chat box, and Duane, if you could go, we will kind of pull those together. And as Duane mentioned, questions, comments, concerns. Often every time I look at this, I have more questions, comments, and concerns every time I think about competency-based education, what it is, what it has to offer, what it doesn't have to offer, what we're doing with other initiatives, and it'll be very exciting and interesting to see what you think of it. Next slide, please. I thought I'd start by just giving some perspective as it was shared to us in terms of what competency-based education is believed to, why it exists, or why the state is looking at it now. And so as I looked at this, I was kind of looking at the vision for success and the core commitments that we have as a community college to our students. And in the vision for success, there are 6 points, 5 of which are believed to be sort of addressed or hope to be addressed through competency-based education. Not that competency-based education is going to be the end-all be-all of everything to, fix and solve all of our challenges, but we have this vision of increasing credential attainment by 20%, and it is our hope that competency-based education is going to help us achieve that, and to reduce the number of units that are needed to obtain a degree, a certificate, an achievement, whatever that student might be pursuing. It is hoped that competency-based education is going to increase employment for CTE students, to reduce and erase equity gaps, and to reduce regional gaps, while at the same time focusing on our core commitments like student goals, equity, expectations and support, making evidence-based decisions, and things like innovation and action. Next slide, please. I want to show here a very short video clip about one of the things that was at the forefront of the curriculum developers sort of kind of embraced competency-based education as they were bringing it forward, because they can say it better than I can. Okay. Oh, I think you have to take out your headphones, unplug your headphones.
Okay, sorry about that. I did test it. There we go. Let me try it again.
You're muted.
Okay, I'm going to try it again.
If you will. So what I want to speak to next and is the equity imperative. This has been.
Okay, just to confirm, can everyone hear that?
Yes. Okay. And that's Marty Alvarado with the state.
Foundational. It's not easy. It's not always clear. It's sometimes easy to think of it as an aside. But we really started with the premise that if we acknowledge that our systems have been historically set up to keep students out, to keep certain populations out, to require that our students at times prove their worthiness to engage in higher education pursuits, that part of what we wanted to do is we had the opportunity to really think about building a new infrastructure for our system, is think about how we design with the intentionality on including our students in, inviting them in, creating infrastructure that actually facilitates their progress and not focuses on them demonstrating their worthiness of being here. And so you'll hear a little bit later on about some of the intentional actions we took to try to make sure that this was at the center of our conversations. How do we ensure that we are designing this with the students in mind, that we are ensuring that we are putting the burden on our institutions and ourselves to ensure learning, rather than putting the burden on students that may not have access to the types of resources that we do as you know, in our positions. So if you will.
So they embraced this with equity at the forefront, finding ways to remove barriers and welcome students in to programs that can lead to work. And that was another thing that really stood out to me when I was learning about competency-based education. And it really speaks to my bias of how I view community colleges, is I really see the community in community colleges. But a view from the state is that all education is workforce development. And that was also part of what they were looking at when they started really embracing the competency-based education. And how can we make this as streamlined and equitable as possible? Next slide, please. So what is competency-based education? Sort of at the forefront of this is the idea that learning is fixed. The outcomes that students are expected and required to master in order to have, you know, to get to their degree or their achievement or whatever, that certificate or whatever it may be that they're getting at the end of the program, that is fixed. How long it takes them to get there is flexible. And so it's no longer about, you know, the fixed start and stop time with a certain number of seats in a chair and going through all the, it's a completely different way of looking at how that program might work. And there's different structures that others will talk about as we move through. but learning is fixed, time is flexible. And that's kind of the overriding theme of competency-based education. The competencies are the learning outcomes that are measured. They have to be measurable in some way. They have to be intentional and transparent, and they are held constant. And those are in different ways. This is the Competency-Based Education Network's definition of competency-based education that you see here. We're going to look at, I think, 3 different definitions. They all have the same theme. They kind of phrase it in different ways. But the competencies, those are the parts that are fixed. They have to be clear, they have to be measurable, and they're going to need to be set up in a way that students can master those competencies at their own pace. And so and then they'll be demonstrating their knowledge and their skills through meaningful, engaged learning exercises along the way to get to that place of mastery. All the while, provided with a great deal of high-touch guidance and support from faculty, from what's referred to as, I think they called them education coaches, or faculty coaches actually is what they called them, and staff. Next slide, please. The ACCJC has a really similar definition, and their definition really focuses on an outcomes-based approach. And as far as I'm able to understand, the outcomes-based approach is really, and it might just be where my brain is stuck, but is really kind of still thinking in terms of student learning outcomes, but it's an outcomes-based approach of looking at how the students are meeting and accomplishing and mastering those competencies. And these competencies are generally developed with industry or the future employers. And for employers to recognize those competencies, they're going to need to have been accomplished or met at a level that is going to be at that industry standard. So it's going to be needed to be met at a very good or excellent level of standard. Next slide. Then the California Community College's definition of CBE focuses on the intentionality of the outcome-based approach with that equity-minded design at the forefront, and looking at flexibility, that time is variable, but the learning is constant, that it's self-paced, high touch, meaning lots of feedback, lots of interaction from that faculty, the faculty coach, the support staff, and lots of innovation. Although that isn't happening in our traditional classroom environment that we have often been thinking of and operating in, the goal of competency-based education is learning empowerment, allowing for that personal, flexible journey, and embracing cultural responsiveness so that students are able to achieve their professional development goal, but to do it a little bit more on their own time and terms. Next slide. So some potential benefits. Flexibility for students. The students are setting their own pace. It is shifting from if you're teaching, you know, it's all about the points and the grades and how many points do I need to focusing on learning and mastery of those competencies. It's not about points. You don't get letter grades. It's about mastery of competencies. It is very high touch, meaning lots of interaction, lots of feedback, very individualized, which a lot of us do anyway. It is really embracing that student empowerment, that building of self-efficacy and learning accountability, and it is a very innovative approach to learning. Are there any other, there might be one other benefit I was thinking of this morning, but I can't think of it now, so it was a fleeting benefit. And I think that is all for my portion. That goes over to Duane.
Great, thank you. So again, as a reminder, if you've got, as we go through, we're going to get into more details now. So if you have questions or ideas about this or concerns or things you want to discuss, please put them in the chat, and we're going to keep track of that and then have a discussion about this in a few minutes. Okay, so So as I was thinking about and trying to learn a little more about CBE, I discovered myself trying to think about how it's similar and different than the other things that we do. And so one thing that it's similar to in some ways is guided pathways. And in fact, in one of the presentations, the folks from the Chancellor's office said that they see competency-based education as sort of a component of guided pathways, like as one of the natural outgrowths of guided pathways. So they're similar in that they both seek to achieve this vision for success, which Marty already covered earlier. And then there's some other commonalities too. So both of these are focused mainly on student outcomes, right? Like how can we help students get to where they're trying to get? That's the clearly defined and structured educational path. How do we help them to achieve their outcomes, whether that's an educational goal or a career preparation goal? And the idea of integrating student support services with instruction as a student proceeds through their path. So instead of having like, these are your classes and these are some services you can use, they're much more integrated into the learning experience. So those things are in common. Here's where I see the link between our traditional model and credit by exam. Like, how are they the same and how are they different? Well, in our traditional model, there on the left, we design a degree, right? Or we want to make a degree, and we figure out what courses go into that degree. We figure out the learning that students are supposed to get out of those courses, the SLOs, and then we make the content. The content is the topics we're going to cover in each course and the assignments and the student learning objectives that build up to the student learning outcomes and so on. Well, in CBE, they don't have courses. They have what they call the program. And the program is essentially a list of all these modules, again, no courses, modules, and each module contains a competency. The competency is how the student is going to, demonstrate achievement at the end of it. And then the content is all intended to help the student achieve the competency. So for example, like in my area in business, let's say that we have a CBE program for office supervision. Like we're going to teach somebody to be a manager, first level manager or supervisor in an office setting. So we go, okay, that's our program, is office management or office supervision. And then we might say, okay, what chunks do the students need to be able to master to do that well? Well, you got to know how to, supervise. Let's say you got to know how to do performance evaluations for your employees. Okay, that's one competency. And so we might write a competency for that. You're going to learn how to do performance evaluations successfully and have these different components of the performance evaluation. Then you build a module around that where you teach the students how to do a performance evaluation. Once they've demonstrated that competency, they move on to the next competency. You might have a list of 30 of these to be an office manager, different things that an office manager is expected to do. Everything from writing a memo to maybe developing a work schedule or making standard operating procedures on how to open and close the office. Okay, so that's sort of the difference. CBE has a strong focus on backward design, kind of what we saw on the last slide. So the concept here is first to define the purpose of the program. And like Marty said, that would probably be defined in close combination with employers or industry, at least for CTE programs. Then you create the competencies that the students are going to learn in each module, like that competency about doing an employee performance evaluation. Then you create the summative assessment for that. The summative assessment is how the student's going to demonstrate that they can do that. So for example, a summative assessment for doing a performance evaluation might be a student producing a written performance, written evaluation, and then role playing with the instructor to actually deliver the feedback, the performance evaluation to the instructor as if the instructor was the employee. You can also create formative assessments along the way to see how the student is doing, making their way to the summative assessment. For instance, in a formative assessment in office management might be that you've established goals for your employee for the next performance evaluation cycle. And you develop module content to teach to help the student get up to that summative assessment. Okay, so that's the idea is you start from with a clear picture of the end in mind, the competencies lead directly to that end, and then you work your way back. So here's some other differences between our traditional model of college education and competency-based education. The biggest difference in my mind is this first one, which Marty already mentioned. You know, right now, you got so much time to be in the class, and at the end of that time period, everyone's assessed and you get a letter grade. The semester's over, everyone gets their grade. So we're holding time constant, and we're varying student achievement, right? Students can vary between A through F. But in CBE, time varies. Each student can take as much time as they need, up to the maximum of the program, to master the competencies. And so naturally, that means that in the traditional model, there are these fixed semester start and stop dates. That's the constant time. But in CBE, there would not be. It would be non-term programs. So a student jumps in when they're ready, they jump out when they're finished. Student achievement varies in a traditional model, but it doesn't in CBE. Every student has to meet the mastery of the competency in order to move forward. Evaluation differs a little too. In the traditional model, yeah, we evaluate on, you know, how well students have achieved the competencies, but other things too, right? Like we might have class participation or exams. There's lots of things that kind of blend into that grade. In CBE, it would just be evaluated by that summative assessment. If the student can do it, then they've achieved the competency. That's all that matters. We're done. The learning support is supposed to be integrated into the learning experiences. The modality of CBE is probably 100% online because it's self-paced and because students will be progressing through at these different rates. Some students might already know how to do a lot of the competencies, and they may be able to clear the summative assessment without, you know, really doing any work because they already know how to do it. So like a student that's already been an office manager might know how to do a performance evaluation. They can just do one and don't have to learn anything about it. So probably that means it's going to be 100% online, although you could potentially have a hybrid course maybe where some of the time is done in person, or maybe you offer different workshops or synchronous training sessions, something like that. And then the program completion. In our traditional model, you got to earn a certain number of units to get a degree, right? 60 units. You got to get passing grades, your GPA counts. There's all these like wickets that you jump through in order to get your degree. In CBE, it's just based on mastery of all these competencies. Once you can do everything that's expected of an office manager, then you get your certificate in being an office manager. So at least to my way of thinking, and I'm glad some of my non-credit colleagues are here because they can probably contribute a lot more than I can to this, but to my way of thinking and to the Chancellor's Office way of thinking, this is how non-credit and continuing ed sort of are the same or differ. So in both of them, time varies and student achievement is held constant. And both of them have summative assessments of the competencies that students go through. So it seems to me that it's pretty similar to the model that's used at non-credit right now. The differences are down here at the bottom. So there would probably be a fee for competency-based education. They haven't figured that out yet, but they'll probably be charging students something. Students would be eligible for financial aid since it would be a college credit program. And for actual college credit, the state is coming up with a way to do that through this concept of a dual transcript. So what's a dual transcript? That's where, because there's no grades involved, a student would go through and clear all these competencies. They would get one transcript that would be the CBE transcript that would show, okay, you know how to do, you know, competency X and Y and Z, and all those added together completes this program, like the office management program. And then that would also be translated to a transcript that has traditional classes. So let's say that when the student goes through all those competencies as an office manager, they also happen to complete all the content that's in Business 201, the business management class. Then they could also get a transcript that says that they have passed Business 201 through this competency-based education. So the student would kind of have these two transcripts. At least that's how I'm understanding what I learned from the Chancellor's Office. Okay, so that's a difference as well. And then there's also some similarities and differences with credit for prior learning and competency-based education. So credit for prior learning is a way in which we can assess what the student has already learned in the past outside of college and award college credit for that learning that happened in the past. So for example, if a student already knows, I don't know, already knows everything about Spanish, you know, or thinks that they're okay to clear Spanish 101, we can give them an exam, a credit by exam test, and see if they really know all the content in Spanish 101. If they do, then they get credit for that class. Credit for prior learning expanded a year or two ago, so now there are a bunch of different options, not just credit by exam. We can also look at industry certifications, and if a student has an industry certification, like let's say they're a licensed paramedic, then we can clear our EMT course, actually give them credit for our EMT course because they've already demonstrated they know how to do that. Okay, so that's credit for prior learning. It's similar in some ways to credit to CBE, to competency-based education, because there's a self-paced aspect, there's a student outcome focus to it, but it's also quite different in some ways. So you can see that on the chart here, right? The timing is credit for prior learning is just a one-time evaluation, maybe through something like industry certification or through a credit by exam test. The outcome is you've completed a course, right? You get course credit on your transcript for credit for prior learning. The student achievement is just the same as a traditional class, whereas competency-based education, there is no grade. The evaluation and credit for prior learning, there are these different methods we can do. I mentioned credit by exam. There's also a student portfolio option, some other options. In competency-based education, it's just that summative assessment of the competencies that we discussed earlier. For credit for prior learning, the assumption is a student has already learned this in the past, so there is no instruction involved. We're just testing them, and if they did really learn it, then we're awarding credit for the class. But in CBE, it's a class, or it's not called a class, but it's like a class, right? The students enroll, they have a teacher, they have the support services, they're learning as they go along, right? There's instruction and learning. Okay, I think that's what I wanted to say on this slide. Okay, so at this point, that's the overview and the basics of what CBE is. The last part of our presentation is kind of like the current status and some models that are going on in the state, but we wanted to stop here and see if we can review the comments or questions that have come up in chat and discuss those with everybody. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Desi to see if she can share. Okay, Desi, you should be able to screen share now. And she's going to try to screen share what we've seen in the chat so far. If needed, you bringing that up, Desi?
Yeah, it's not pulling over from my other screen. Of course.
Oh, okay.
Always a technical difficulty.
Well, there's not a ton of chat, so maybe we can just do it off of the chat window.
Right. We have one concern now, seeing how this works for non-CTE programs, since there's no industry per se. That's the one concern. And then we have 3 questions pending. Excuse me. Yes, we have 4 questions pending.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about the non-CTE program thing. It's true that in the materials that we saw from the Chancellor's office that they were envisioning this as being something that could be done in non-CTE programs. But Mara, my colleagues, correct me if I'm wrong, but when we looked at like models out there and what people are really doing, it looks like everyone's kind of doing CTE only. Is that the case, Mara?
That's what I've found. So in the models that I'll share, it's really CTE programs.
I think there are some concerns as well about non-CTE programs and transfer, right? Because who knows if the universities would be happy with that. Yeah, Andrew, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was the one who had the question or the concern, because it makes no sense to me for non-CTE programs. We are driven, after all, by transfer. You know, I'm in English, as you know, and nobody really makes much of a mark in the world with an associate's degree in English. You know, you're transferring probably to a 4-year institution, and those are the organizations that basically guide what our associate's degree looks like. because they accept it or they don't accept it. And basically throughout a lot of other fields, non-CTE fields, that's going to be the case. So I guess that's what I was wondering, because at first, before we started doing this, I thought this was supposed to be all across the board, 100%. But it's striking me very much as a CTE focus. Do you feel that?
I certainly feel that. I'll open it up to the other, to my colleagues that helped develop the presentation. I think we did discuss that when we got together and talked about it. Also, just so everyone knows, we're trying to capture everything that's brought up today and save it so that if we do decide to do this as a district in the future, we already have a list of questions and concerns that we need to work out. So Marty, Desi, or Mara, would you like to add?
Yeah, I'll chime in. So when I started learning about it, the chancellor's office kept saying how they felt that this was just great for everybody. And then they also acknowledged that it is also has to be bought in. You have to have universities acknowledging them, accepting them, because if someone goes through a CBE program and then tries to transfer, and the transferring institution looks at it and says, what in the world is this? We've done more of a disservice than anything else. So there is, I would say there's like a gap there in terms of the ideas and the like actual reality. Like there's some missing pieces in play. Also, at first, when I first started learning about it, I went into this very skeptical, and then I was like, oh, some of this is pretty exciting. And then I started getting kind of insulted and offended, because I felt like, wow, there's so many of these things I see that I already do, like in my course, that I have incorporated into like culturally responsive teaching. I'm always striving to do that. I may not be there yet, but I'm always trying. We have student learning outcomes, and we're always like supposed to be, having our courses designed around these student learning outcomes. We have guided pathways, and that'll all get addressed as we move forward a bit. But we have all of these things that we're doing that are in our, our transfer courses that incorporate many of these aspects in different ways, still more within our traditional stream. And then, so I feel like for me, in my opinion, I feel like there's a couple of different like streams happening from the chancellor's office, and they see this as a part of guided pathways. It's definitely not for every program, but they did want to plant the seed and make sure that colleges knew about it. And they are using it in different places, but there are some gaps, and I think there are some overlaps. Like, I don't know how my program would do this. I can't imagine the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, when students go to transfer, would accept a CBE program from their students. They are, the accrediting bodies may or may not accept it. So there's a lot of gaps that I see and disconnects. And then when I was at the program mapping yesterday with Lisa and the speaker from Bakersfield, they were talking about how when they started doing their online program mapping, they really were finding that once they started to have that out there for students to be able to see how their program path could flow, and what the career choices, how you get to a degree, how you get to a certification, and what the financial outcome might be potentially based on labor market data, they started to close equity gaps. So I feel like we have a lot of things potentially going on at one time. So your concerns are very real, and they have no answers for that.
But we're going to capture them. We're gonna list them and keep the list. Yeah, Desi or Mara, did you want to comment that as well? And then I'll open up to anybody else.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I have the list now. I'm still adding 2 more, but if you let me present, I can add them in 2 seconds.
I just have a couple of comments to add. And that is that when I was reviewing this, I was reviewing it from my articulation lens. And that is because I'm always looking at what the receiving institution is going to do, right? Or what they may or may not do. And I do see that there are pathways that lend themselves better to this. And Andrew, you're right on, like CTE just seems to be such a natural flow for this. I like the idea. I really think it's great in terms of addressing an equity issue and streamlining. It's just the how-to that's really difficult. And I do see it would be really difficult for some of the transfer majors, but perhaps because GE is based on certain GE outcomes, that may be a starting point if we were to look at some others, if we needed to go down the transfer road and examine some ways to do this for transfer. I don't know how that looks right now. I'm just throwing it out there. But definitely, I agree that like CTE is probably the easiest starting point if we were to take this on.
Thanks, Mara. Does anyone else want to comment about this, this idea about how this would work in non-CTE areas? If not, we'll move on to some of the other ones. Yeah, Papa?
Yeah, I was thinking it could work pretty well for sustainability courses. I also teach communication. I think it could work pretty well for that too, in terms of identifying specific tests. Can you do this? Can you do that? You know, for sustainability, I was thinking, can you assess a problem and, you know, talk to all the stakeholders and produce a report that would address these problems and provide solutions, right? I mean, it seems like there's some pretty concrete things students could do. So I could see if you're starting from scratch, how you could keep this in mind and have two parallel things, like a course that's a regular course and also a CBE course that's just modules. I could see it getting pretty complicated too, but I definitely see the possibility of making that work, right? For two different types of students, maybe. You know, maybe there's something here for an office of CBE that says, okay, how do we convert as many classes as possible to CBE so students that, you know, have certain skills can get the degree or something. I don't know. I think there's a lot of possibilities here myself.
Yeah, thank you. That's interesting too, to think of it as like a parallel track maybe. And also if we don't really have any details, but if they figure out that dual transcript thing, that might be a way to convert this to GE credit or something like Mara mentioned.
Yeah, I think that'd be really enriching for students to do. I mean, I would have loved to have both options, you know. I think the more options we can give, especially in terms of equity, the more likely we're going to draw more students in and give them more to take with them somewhere.
Good, thank you. Other comments about this that we can capture before we go on?
Yeah, Duane, I think, you know, I absolutely agree with Mara in terms of for some CTE courses and child development, I can see this work really well for our students, because I think that with those dual transcripts, right, the employers can see that, oh, okay, so she knows how to do this, he knows how to do this, you know, that there are clear competencies that in child development it would work for, and it would just enhance, I think, their what do you call that, employability, if they had that, you know, the dual part of it, as Pablo had mentioned. So.
Yeah, so in other words, it's like you're seeing that the student has completed the class, but then it's also almost like an additional guarantee or demonstration or certification of some kind that the student can do the things that the employers are looking for as well. Yeah, I can see that in my own field too. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Anyone else?
I think it's the soft skills sometimes, you know, that you can also incorporate in here, that sometimes the courses are not quite designed to incorporate that in their, you know, in their normal courses.
Yeah, I guess if you can make a formative assessment that's a really authentic way to measure the soft skill, that can be powerful for the student and for the employer. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Let's go on to the next one, or some of the questions. Desi, can you give us what you think should be the next thing we should talk about? You're on mute.
Okay, want me to share this Excel spreadsheet?
Yeah, if you can, sure.
Can you see it?
Yes, I can now.
Okay, so if you just scroll down here, will the slides be shared?
Yes. I think they're going to go into the Flex. There's like a Flex presentation archive. And so they should go in there, but I'm also happy to send them to anyone who wants them. So Lawrence, if you'd like them, I'll make a note and send them to you, but I think they'll be in the repository too.
Great. Okay. So we have a lot of the same questions. These are great questions, but we know as a presenting team that we just don't know the answers. And that would be, how will the faculty be contracted? Let me group these together. You know, how will the UCs and the CSUs accept CBE? We don't have answers for that yet, but there are a couple of really good ones here about prior learning. So programs competencies would be matched to courses, so students get credit for taking courses, kind of like testing out for CPL. Did you want to talk about that for just a second?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. That's a good one. So it sounds like it's possible to do it that way. So it's possible that you can make a CBE program, put the competencies in the CBE program that also happen to cover everything that's in a class or even a series of classes. And then when the student has completed the CBE program, that demonstrates that they've also completed all the competencies needed for those classes. And then the student would get transcripted credit, maybe one of two ways. So one way is through this dual transcript idea that the Chancellor's Office is still kind of working on, where, you know, the student has finished the CBE program, and then we go, okay, well, that program matches, you know, to these 3 courses. So we're going to list these 3 courses on the student's transcript. You know, they've completed Business 201 and 155 and, you know, 119, because those 3 are what they, you know, they covered all the content for those 3 through their CBE program. Another way that we could do it, like, let's say the Chancellor's Office never gets their act together and they can't figure out how to do that dual transcript thing. Well, if that happens, using the tools that we now have in credit for prior learning, I can see us still being able to transcript some courses for a student, because we could convert the work that the student does in CBE, like the summative assessments, all the things that they're going to demonstrate to clear all those requirements, all those competencies, we could convert that into a portfolio, right? That's what it is. It's a bunch of documented demonstration of student work. That's a portfolio. And then we're allowed to award credit for prior learning using student portfolios. So even if there is no dual transcript, it seems to me that there's a tool that we have in our toolbox where we could convert that to college credit. Did I answer that question, whoever that's from? And would anyone else like to jump in about that? Andrew? Yeah, go ahead, please.
Well, this is just kind of coming to my mind as we're talking about this. And I see the question about the UC and CSUs. But again, this goes back to the CTE. As you know very well, there's a lot of other accrediting agencies, depending on, you know, what program we're talking about. So for example, I work in English, but I also teach in the Health Information Management program at Mesa. And we have our own accrediting bodies there. And I mean, is there any sense? And some of them are national, not just state level. And I just have no idea if they would accept the, you know, credit based on this. You know, and I kind of came to that thought because I was thinking, well, I can just imagine the HIMSS people just running for the hills if they heard about this, thinking, no, we're going to lose our accreditation if we go this way.
Yeah, my sense is that it would be highly variable depending on the field. You know, like for instance, I don't get the sense in my own field in business or management that people wouldn't have a problem with this. Like, I think many you know, we don't have an accreditation agency for business, right? So maybe that's part of it, but I think a lot of employers would like this. But I can totally see, and I've heard from some colleagues that other fields might be really hard with their accreditors. Yeah. Other comments about that? Specifically about that question about how competencies are matched to courses and how students might get credit for that. Okay, good. Did you like my sneaky way around it with using the credit by exam student portfolio? That's the first time I've thought of any way to productively use a student portfolio. Okay, what's the next one?
Okay, so another one of the we don't knows yet would be the how might financial aid be effective? I didn't mention that affected. Many students have financial aid based on units and time spent in college. It's kind of one of those we just don't know yet, correct?
Well, we don't know for sure, but we do have some guidance because we know that it's allowed under financial aid, and we know that federal financial aid allows either the traditional unit-bearing courses or the, someone help me out, maybe Shelley, the credit hour equivalencies, something like that. And we know that for competency-based education, when you do the modules, each module, you're supposed to find a way to convert it into the credit hour equivalency. So in fact, the draft legislation for the state says that the curriculum committees will be responsible for that, basically, that the colleges are going to have to figure out how much credit a student is going to get for these things. And so I think I don't think it's like a definitive answer, and certainly to my knowledge, no one's like done it yet, the community college system, but I feel like that one's, they've already got like a solution in place, or at least an idea of a solution. Yeah, Andrew.
Well, I was just kind of thinking, let's say somebody says you get, in the normal system, you get X amount of dollars to take 9 units for 1 semester, whatever that number is. And they're going to turn around and say, well, you already got the units for this because you've got the CBE, and therefore you don't need this money, because you're not spending the next 16 weeks in school. Something like that. Anyway, there's all kinds of different angles I could think about that could create some interesting issues. But if the state has already said okay, that helps. But the devil's in the details.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Something like that. Yeah, for sure. Is there anyone that knows more about financial aid or would like to comment more on that that's in the group here? I'm not a financial aid expert at all. No, okay. What's the next one you think we should tackle here?
Okay, can you elaborate on the completion of program versus course?
Yeah, so in the traditional model, students complete courses. Those courses go on their transcript, and then, once they get the right mix of courses and enough units and a good enough grade, then they get a degree. In CBE, the end product is something called a program, and the program is supposed to be like a big defined chunk of what the student will do, almost like a certificate or a degree. Maybe it even would be a certificate or a degree, let's say a certificate of achievement. And then the student is going to be, instead of completing courses on their way to getting that certificate, they're completing a bunch of competencies or demonstrating the competencies that are required to achieve that certificate. So like Becca in your field, not that I know much about it, but I know in biotech, you got to know how to use one of those pipette things, right? And you move stuff from one to the other. And I know you have to be able to separate DNA from wheat germ, because my kids got to do that at your field trip thing. So maybe those will be 2 different competencies, right? One is, can a student demonstrate pipetting skills to a certain level? And another one is, can you extract and separate or analyze DNA, right? So those, instead of that being meshed into a class, those are just these 2 competencies in a list of maybe 30 competencies that a student needs to achieve to get to the end of the program. Does anyone else from the presenters want to jump in on that, or did I say that correctly? Okay, anyone else?
Can I ask a question on that? Sorry.
Yeah, of course.
Brought up a question since it's my field. So we've worked with other external people about badges, and that's kind of what this competency-based education theory is about. But it wouldn't be an internal to our certificate. It would be defining what that program entails and saying these are the competencies, or could it be tied to the courses as well? I guess I'm a little confused about that.
Well, I think the way the state envisions it is, it's going to be something different than courses. Like it's not tied to courses. It's its own separate thing over here. And the end result will still be a degree or certificate. And if for some reason a student really needs it to be tied to courses, then, hopefully we'll have that dual transcript thing that will be able to do that. Does that help? Okay.
Duane, I have a follow-up question on that.
Yeah,
And that was my, I put that, I posted that question regarding courses versus programs. And one of the first slides that was shared is that this could increase, transferability by maybe 30% or 40%. And I'm just trying to now connect, how does that happen if, we're still trying to figure out whether or not students will earn the criteria needed to be eligible for transfer. So
well,
in tying that with courses, if they're working on a program, how do then we, you shared in a previous example on a previous issue, how it could possibly be turned into credit by examination to, kind of creatively give them course credit. But it just seems like there's some missing pieces to, really determine whether or not students can earn transferable credit for CBE.
yeah, it's a great question. I would say there's huge missing pieces to it. And I don't think, while the increasing transfer is one of the goals of the student success framework or whatever it is, and the goals of guided pathways, I don't think any of us presenters think that this will primarily be a transfer focused thing, at least in the beginning. But maybe I can punt that to Mara or somebody else that knows more about transfer. Any comments on that, Mara?
Just the comment I had earlier about, perhaps GE could be a starting point, but I mean, the conversation hasn't even happened with UCs and CSUs on what they think. As far as I know, it may be happening at some high level that I don't know about, but we haven't heard of it in the articulation world.
Well, I just want to say, go ahead.
Well, sorry. So I would say theoretically, like, let's say this really happens and it all rolls out perfectly and everything's beautiful. Then theoretically, how this could help students transfer is if I've already got a bunch of skills that I need for transfer, like in the example Pablo gave us. Let's say I'm already a skilled public speaker. Pablo's class is great, but I don't have to sit through his entire class to learn how to be a public speaker. I'm already a really good public speaker. Then I go through CBE. It's self-paced. I can go and demonstrate all these competencies that I already have. I can get done with that in a month or a couple weeks. And, I've already cleared that GE area without having to do a whole lot of other work. You know what I'm saying? I think that's the concept. Okay, like sorry, I stepped on you earlier, so go ahead.
No, I was saying, so that would be very similar then to the credit by examination, though.
It'd be similar to it. The difference is CBE, competency-based education, there's still instruction involved, and you're still with a professor, and you don't have to demonstrate it all the same time. Like, let's say I'm really good at, I don't know, argumentative speeches, but not at extemporaneous speeches. In fact, I'm not very good at extemporaneous speeches. So maybe I have to learn something about extemporaneous speeches, and it takes me a little more time and effort to get to that competency, but I've got all the other ones mastered. You know what I mean? So it's a little more flexible, I guess, than credit by exam. Credit by exam is just, oh, you think you know everything in this class? Here, take a test and prove it. That's all that it is. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we have 4 questions left. From an instructional perspective, what sort of challenges have instructors experienced with CBE? I feel like logistically it could be difficult to track the student progress given that there are flexible timelines.
Yeah, it seems like that to me too. Does any of the other presenters have thoughts about this? I don't even know that I don't think there has been any instruction yet in the state for us to look at, but maybe in other places. Mara, did you come across anything like that in your study?
Not yet. I have some examples of where they're just getting started, but they don't dig into these very specific types of questions.
No, there wasn't in the information that we got. There were a couple of presentations from the Chancellor's office, and there wasn't data. So there wasn't, and part of that is because I don't think that data exists yet. there's a few places that Mara will show us that have been doing this for a while. This isn't new. CBE isn't new. It's just not done very often in a lot of places, but it has been around for a long time. But yeah, there's a lot of questions about instruction and logistics and how it works and the challenges that faculty will experience or the differences. We have no idea.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on that? Again, I feel a little funny because I know we have a lot of questions and comments that we're not able to answer, but we are going to record them. So someday if we try to do this, we know what the challenges are and what the concerns are. That's part of the purpose of the Flex today. Just unmute yourself and jump in if anyone else would like to comment on that one before we move on.
I have seen it in a CTE course. The issue that they ran into, and I wasn't teaching it, was that they still followed the semester schedule. So when the student completed, there was a third party that they were using for the course material, and they were able to start that, but the students still operated under under that course with the units in that traditional environment. So it created kind of a weird dynamic for that. So that's certainly something that have to get resolved. The fact that you could do that kind of self-paced does require a lot of work to get it laid out. That's the other concern I have is with CTE, it's so dynamic. It really requires, in a lot of cases, a third party with a lot of resources to maintain that. And there are a few of them out there in the ITC-DM sector that do that, like Cisco. AWS is now doing that, but they have deep pockets. So that's the other concern I would see, even for ITC-DM.
Good, thank you, Richard. Just to elaborate on that or to make sure I understand it, what you're saying is because the fields that are most likely to use this are also the fields that are changing the most, all these different competencies might change and morph over time. The way that you demonstrate them might change, the technologies might change. And so it's a big, huge thing that you got to manage and change all the time. So there's a lot of upfront work right before the class is even happening. Is that right?
That's correct. And I was on an ITC-DM, one of their Friday conferences, and I regret I don't remember which school was actually doing something with Google. And they said very clearly that it does take a lot of upfront work. This was again, I'm sorry, I don't remember the college, but that was something they stressed in order to do it effectively, to allow that self-paced movement for the students.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we've got about maybe 15 minutes left before we move on with the rest of our presentation. 10 to 15 minutes. Desi, I think there's been some additional stuff in the chat. Have you been looking at that and adding it and deciding what we should do next?
If we take the last question, do we have time just to take the last? I'm going to merge two of them together. Do you have
Yeah,
time?
we got at least 10 minutes. We've got till 3:30, but we have some more slides to go through.
We sure do. Okay, great. Are there limits or issues with the number of units that a student can earn, right, for CBE? And then also, how are class sizes effective, since there's going to be more individualized, learning going on? So we could kind of merge those two. Hopefully there's an answer or some guidelines. I think I remember you guys talking about something with this.
To my knowledge, there's no limit to the number of units that people are talking about. Does anyone, am I misremembering that? Co-presenters, does anyone remember any unit restrictions?
I didn't see any unit restrictions for CB for competency-based education, no.
Okay. It's almost, to my way of thinking, it's almost like counterintuitive to do that, because the idea is that we're not really worried about units and time and all that stuff, just the competencies. But I could, there are limits to the number of units students can get for, like credit by exam. So I can see maybe there would be in the future. And class sizes, in a way, my understanding of CBE is that I'm not sure I would even call it a class. Like there's a pipeline that's set up, right? There's this program with all these competencies in it and all these modules for all the competencies. And students are coming in and out all the time. Some students come in and they start on module 1. It takes them a long time to get through. Other students come in, they can demonstrate the first 5 competencies, no problem. They work on number 6 more, 7 and 8, they get right through. They struggle with 9 and 10. You know, I don't know, maybe you'd have a dozen students in there at one time. You might have 50 in there at one time. Some students are gonna take a month and some students are gonna take a year and a half. I don't even know how you would define class size the way that at least the way I'm understanding CBE. Thoughts on that from anyone else, not just the presenters, but anybody in the group?
Hi, Duane. I was the one who asked that question. This is Jay Callanan.
Yeah, hi, Jay. Thanks.
Hey, yeah, so that's exactly, your response was exactly what I thought it was, that students would be coming in and out as they finish through the modules. And I guess that goes back to the contracting of the faculty, because if you have you know, a list of all of these competencies for the students to complete, you know, I guess in terms of contracting faculty, would specific faculty be assigned to, I guess, facilitating, you know, the students' completion of all of these different competencies, or do they rotate every, you know, once or 2 or 3 months or something like that? Because that's kind of what I was trying to get at with that question as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, fortunately for us, one of our presenters is Desi, who used to work in human resources, and she tells me she's already figured out exactly how we're going to pay all the instructors, right? Yeah, I mean, that's a huge. I believe that's a huge issue, and that will be a very difficult challenge to overcome. Is how to even measure or define what an instructor assignment is for this, right? What a load is. Can you share it? If there's 30 different competencies and some of them have to do with writing and some of them have to do with, you know, math, and some of them might have to do with other things. Can you have 3 or 4 different instructors teaching the same thing? Yeah, I think those are some of the, my opinion those are some of the biggest hurdles that we'll have to overcome to do this in real life, and also that we've made, as far as I can tell, they've made the least progress on. Desi, does that sound like a good summary of what we discussed?
Absolutely. Perfect. Other than that, we just have 2 concerns. One is, anything else on that? Should I move on?
Nothing else from me. Anybody else in the group that want to talk about that? It's kind of nice when we can say we have no idea, because there's not much people can say after that, right? Okay, what's the next one?
We do have 2 concerns, that maybe having the dual transcript might be viewed as, you know, a less than type transcript for the CBE. That was one. And then the second concern, not seeing how this works for non-CTE programs. There's no industry per se, but I think that we've already addressed that earlier. So.
Yeah, I think we already addressed that second one. That first one, can you read that again or show me where that is again, please?
Right here. It says the dual transcripts seem a little odd. I would question whether the CBE courses are not good enough to make it on the official transcript. Question. That's actually a question, but I didn't word it that way. Maybe viewed as less than.
Yeah, it's not something that I had thought about before, but I can see that as maybe being a challenge with this, like almost like, oh, I went through a traditional program, and so my transcript's better than the person that went through the CBE program. That's really you know, the not good one or the not quality one, or vice versa, maybe. Whoever brought that up, would you like to elaborate on that, or does anyone else have thoughts on that?
I brought that up. It up, Duane. To be honest, one of the first things I thought about when you made the second degree, I thought about separate but equal. So we want to offer this type of education. We're saying through the state it is valid. We're saying that, you know, come in and earn, you know, this type of award, which it does seem like a different award, but now we're talking about, but we're going to put it on another type of transcript. So it's just a few, like I said, odd type of things that are just coming up. So I just wanted to bring that up.
I appreciate it. I made a note of it just now for myself. I think it's a really valid concern. And when the presenters kind of talked privately about this before building this presentation, we discussed the concept of equity with this. And you know, the way the chancellor's office says it is, oh, this is going to help everybody to achieve, you know, better, and it's going to be a more equitable, more fair, and so on. And I can see that argument. We also have some concerns about maybe it's like a pathway to help students drop out. You know, like if a student can go into this self-paced thing that has less structure, you know, than our traditional programs, you know, less deadline pressure. Maybe, I mean, they're not envisioning that this way, but maybe less instructor contact because you're not meeting regularly in a class. You know, I can see that being a recipe for failure for a lot of students, you know? So I don't know.
One of the things also just reminded me also is I remember when our high school system, we had 2 tracks, right? We had a college prep track and we had this vocational track. And again, it was assessing who belonged where, and it eventually just it didn't seem that it was as productive as maybe the goals of that particular program was.
Yeah, you know, I'm quite interested in this topic, and I would love to talk about it more. I'm tempted because I have like philosophical things to say about that. I guess I'll leave it with this: is to me the root of that problem at high school or with this or whatever is not that we have different pathways that students can follow. And it's not that those pathways lead to different outcomes, it's that in our minds, we've decided that one outcome is better than another outcome, right? Like we've decided that, oh, a university transfer program is higher than a CTE program. I mean, to me, that's an artificial, false distinction in our minds, but society is seen in that way. And I feel like in some ways in education, we're reinforcing that to everybody's detriment. And I can see the risk of it with this now that you bring, I didn't think of it that way, but now that you bring it up, yeah. Would anyone else like to comment on that?
Actually, that's where my mind went right before Kirk said it. In fact, I remember the days when I was first starting to work with CTE programs, and that was it was like a huge hurdle to get over to once, you know, we started, it was like tracking students was the initial perception, and it took a lot of work to blur those lines and, you know, have people view them very differently. It sounds sort of counterintuitive to guided pathways now that we're talking about this, because it's, you know, it's separating students. So that's a really good point, Kirk.
Yeah, we'll make sure that we capture that in our list of concerns with this if it ever comes to, you know, comes to where we're looking at doing it for real. Other comments on that from anybody, not just the presenters? And Kirk, did you want to make any other comments about that? I kind of jumped in.
Oh no, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you though.
Okay, thank you.
So, Duane, I have a little bit of a different perspective. I thought that the idea of the CBE would really open it up for more equitable opportunities for some students who may not work well in the traditional program, and that this affords them, and maybe I'm just talking from, you know, my own experiences with the teachers in our field in child development. You know, I've seen lots of students succeed really well in the traditional, and then they come in to the teaching field and they just don't have the skills, right? The practical skills that, you know, works really well with children. And so this is where I think that, you know, the competency-based education is, you know, I think, and I've seen a lot of students who are C students, you know, and then when they're in the field, you know, and I see them in the field, they are, you know, the best teachers that, you know, I would want with my children or anybody else's children. So that I just wanted to put that in. I think to me, when I saw it, and, you know, as we get more educated with, you know, the CBE, I think that I thought, you know, and I still think that it's a great way to extend that, you know, equity for all types of learners and all types of different types of learning. Secondly, I just wanted to go back to, you know, how will a faculty you know, how do we hire them and how do we pay them, or that sort of thing. And, you know, just popped out of my mind. And that would be, I probably in this case, it wouldn't be, I would look at it as like a caseload. And then, you know, like you have the first, you know, 30 students, and then if we need more, then we'll hire another faculty. But I think it might be a way of being able to track the students, number one, you know, keep that what we call primary caregiver, primary, you know, educator to be with them, to help them along through this. And then we also, thirdly, you know, I think it addresses our students who are already teachers, but they haven't had the time to, you know, to finish the other courses. And from what my understanding, Duane, you mentioned that, you know, this could be a way of demonstrating their competencies in, you know, I'll just throw out, you know, doing lesson plans, or, you know, we already have a set of competencies in our field. So I just, those were the three things that I kind of wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing those up. Go ahead, Kirk.
Can I make a clarification? Because I just want to make sure that I'm not saying that I'm against this competency-based education. I just wanted to bring up how students would receive their credit on a separate dual transcript. And the same thing in terms of if we use child development as an example, many students come into our educational system, those wanting to pursue child development, and they may not be prepared to earn a degree, but they want to begin taking some classes. And those classes eventually build towards an associate degree or build towards transfer. And there's definitely some pathways that are included. And I just want to make sure that in creating the CBE courses or programs, that they still lead to pathways towards higher education. And that's the part that I'm missing in having it on a dual degree. It again creates a new separation to those pathways. So I don't want to think that I'm against the CBE. I just, in terms of the structure and the process and making sure that it's connected, those are the things that I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you to both of you. Those are great points, and I've captured them here. Weiling, your first comment too made me think that you know, maybe the elimination of grades might be a huge benefit for a lot of students, because I know a lot of students stress a lot about their grades, right? And if it's just about the learning and the competency, I can see where that would make a big difference to a lot of people. Yeah, I've had an experience with this a little bit myself in my last career, and it did feel good just to not have, you know, just to be graded on how well I did. Like I had to do this well, I had to be able to do this thing, and if I could do that thing, then I was good, you know, like it didn't really, there was no A student or B student or whatever. It was nice. I also really appreciate your suggestion about paying by caseload, and I've captured that we didn't come up with that idea ourselves earlier, so I'm glad we got that from you. Thank you. Okay, any final comments about any of that before we move on? Okay, we got everything in the chat, I hope.
We do.
Okay, great, thank you. Desi, thank you so much for keeping us on track for all that stuff and organizing it. That looks great. Mara, this next part is for you. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the PowerPoint, and you can take it away, please.
Okay, thanks. So I just wanted to share with you all, or we all wanted to share with you all kind of what the current status is of this. When we were gathering information, I freaked out a little bit and thought we were going to be told that we had to do this like right now. And that is not the case. However, there have been some draft Title V regulations put together. Hasn't gone anywhere, just some language that's been put together. I'll share with you sort of a summary of that in the next slide. And there are some colleges have been asked to pilot this. And the idea was to get information on those pilot colleges, because I was under the impression that that had already started. However, I don't think that they've been identified yet, or if they have, they haven't been announced. And the pilot is actually supposed to run beginning this spring and through fall 2023. So there's no big rush. so we can take our time and have additional conversations. So here are the draft regulations. That area in blue is the link to the draft Title 5 55260. It's long, and these are the subheadings within it. So they've addressed a lot of, I don't know if they've fully addressed it, but they've kind of touched on some of the areas that we've talked about today, including instructor contact and faculty selection and workload, evaluation, and I think there's transcripting, academic record symbols, and grade point average. So that has kind of been drafted. And again, this hasn't gone anywhere because I think it needs to go through input and things like that. And we all just still even need to decide whether this is going to happen. So, so that's where we're at, draft regulations. And this will allow, oh, sorry, one more thing. Just a clarification here too. If this is chaptered into Title 5, I believe, because we talked about this in our work group, Duane helped to clarify, it would allow us the flexibility to offer it, but I don't think it's going to mandate us. Is that right, Duane?
Well, that's my understanding, but you know how it is. We've heard that with other things in the past.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we cross our fingers. So that's that. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is sort of the way that they want to have the pilot go. There's going to be a collaborative of campuses. I don't know how many, but they'll work in close coordination with the CCCCO, the Chancellor's Office. They're going to be given some money to launch these programs. So a lot of times we complain that there's no money to do these things, but there's money attached to this. There's support, some program development support. There'll be research has already been, I think, integrated into sort of the plan. And then they'll gather recommendations for improvement and inform the broader system once the pilot is running. And then there's the dates. Okay. So models to look at. That's probably of interest to us all. Luckily, I mean, so there's not very many out there, as we talked about earlier. There's some happening in other states, but in California, this is really, really new. But luckily, we have one model 2.2 right here in our district, and that's our continuing education. They just launched in 2020, I believe fall 2020. So this is still fairly new. I don't know that we have a whole lot of information on what they're doing, but they have an ICOM Academy, and our CE colleagues here maybe can correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. But so far, the Academy is focused on IT skills. So it's skill-based. There's pathways, there's 16 pathways. There's a website. Let's see if I can bring it up. And it emphasizes that the pathways are supposed to be intensive and short-term, often completed within 5 to 10 months. It's free. OER is a big focus to create access. It's fully online. We talked about programs being fully online or hybrid in an earlier slide. So this is fully online and it's flexible. So this is self-paced, and that's really, I think a lot of the CE programs have already traditionally operated like that. So they have structures in place already to be able to do that. Let me give you examples of their actual programs. So I mentioned 16 pathways, and I'm going to give you these examples so we can sort of see, like we talked earlier about how some pathways lend themselves to this a little bit better than others. So small business planning is one, virtual data center, Linux server administration, programming with Python. So some of those IT areas, but there's also childcare provider. So Weiling talked about how this works really well in child development, infant care specialist, child home care training. And then there's project management, health unit coordinator. Those are just some examples. And then quick service technicians. So you can see for us, these look like some of our own college CTE fields. Okay, so that's CE. And if you want to dig in more, they have information posted on their website. And then there's a few models in the state and then nationally. So the LA Community College District received some federal funds years ago through a TACT grant. Some of you might be familiar with that. And they created pathways in their healthcare careers. And so they have a consortium called the Healthcare Competency to Career Consortium, where I think there's 9 colleges in the LA Community College District, worked closely with their industry partners and the chamber to focus on credential-based stackable awards, creating credential-based stackable awards. So we talked about that a little bit earlier, and Becca mentioned badging, because that's kind of where I'm familiar with this sort of model, is that badging has been talked a lot about when you talk about competencies. So the reason why they decided to do this was because the demand for healthcare professionals was really high, and they needed to crank people out into the field. So they thought about this idea of digital badging and credentials for industry specific skills. And so we've talked about that throughout. And just to give you an example of some of the skills they're looking to create badges for, that includes things like infection control, diversity awareness, soft skills, customer service. So if you think about it in modules, as opposed to courses, to create all those skills, because I know, like, I'm still having a hard time wrapping my head around it, but I have to think about the skill-based model. So that's what LA, they're really early. So they started this pathway a while back with some federal funds. And I think just recently, in the last couple of years, they've been trying to build out the credential-based competency-based education part of this. And so I don't know sort of where they're at this point. I know that that was the goal. The other model to look at is at Foothill College. Like it says here, they're focused on expansion of their dental hygiene baccalaureate program. They were a baccalaureate pilot program. And I think they used it as a jump off point to look at turning this into a competency-based educational pathway, because it's competency-based in nature. Kind of similar to what LA said, like, you know, with the infection control and things like that. And so in this model, their plan is to use portfolio assessment to document the learning competencies. The other thing about this is we kind of talked about how do you manage the student movement through it. Well, in dental hygiene, it's cohort based. So they plan to look at keeping students within cohorts. And I think that's how they're going to manage that. The final model here is Western Governors University. And that is based in Utah. And it's a collaborative that's happened since the 1990s. It's been in place since the 1990s. I believe it's mostly private universities, and they offer competency-based degree programs in things like business, general education, IT, and health pathways. So they're very focused on the same ones that we've been talking about all along in these other 2 models here. And they have about, where did I put it? There's 8 affiliate states with Western Governors. Utah is the home base for that. Okay, next slide. And then finally, how this works at other institutions. There is a repository as we go along here. The Council on Adult and Experiential Learners, CALE, collects information on these types of initiatives and models. I know that they have been giving guidance on how to do CPL, credit for prior learning. And so for CBE, they will also be collecting and tracking student participation in CBE. So this is a place where we can go, you know, to look for information if we decide to expand this out in our own district. I think that's it.
Thank you, Mara. Okay, are there any questions or follow-ups for Mara's portion of the presentation?
We have two.
Okay,
I'll just read them out.
okay.
The first one is, do we know if Job Corps is using this model?
I don't. Does anyone know?
Yeah.
I don't know. I know what Job Corps is, but I don't know if they're using this model.
Okay. And I had captured a previous question of Marty's that was not discussed, and it was basically, do you think that we could have a CBE option with pass or no pass?
I think, yeah, I think CBE by its nature is sort of pass, no pass. I'm not sure how that would, I'm not sure if we can have an option that would or wouldn't affect the GPA. I'm not even sure how they're going to be tracking that. It also makes me think that in some ways, if we had just like a regular old class and mandated that students took it pass, no pass, that would sort of, in some ways, be like CBE, at least in the grading side of it, you know, the competency side of it. But anybody else have ideas about that? The pass, no pass concept?
Yeah, Duane.
Yeah, thanks. Go.
Well, early in one of the presentations, one of the slides, it said something about because it was industry driven, they expected it to levels to be excellent or very good. So if it's a pass, no pass, it might have to be a higher than 70% type pass. If
That's
you
a great
understand what I
point.
mean. You know,
Yep, I do.
so,
that's a great point.
You know, maybe if it's an 80 percentile, you know, 80% score pass, that something like that. So like in HIMSS at Mesa College, we have 75% because we're expected not to be a little bit better than the 70.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think somewhere in one of the things I read about CBE, they had established an 80% set point for it.
Right.
Thank you. Okay, we've got, it's 3:30. My clock's a little slow on my desk. So I think that ends it. Are there any final questions or comments that people have burning in their minds that they want to ask? Okay, well, so this was just an information session, and again, just to gather our questions and concerns about it so that we can keep track of those in case we decide to try this out in the future in our district. We will add the comments that we got today, and thank you everybody for contributing to those. I will stay on the Zoom room for a while if anyone wants to stay and chat about any of this or anything else. And I want to thank my co-presenters for all their time and effort. They dedicated their time over winter break to research this, get smart on it, and build this presentation. So I really appreciate your volunteer time to Mara and Marty and Desi, and also Isabella, who's not here today, but she contributed as well. Thank you all so much. And it's good to see a lot of my curriculum colleagues. I guess I'll see you again next week or the week after that when we meet again.